This is part 2 of making a mithril shirt. We're moving on to the final beading touches, and I wanted to go over some of the materials that I used. I had to buy a few of them in order to complete this project. First things first, the main thing that I used was beads. I did end up buying way too many, so I used a combination of twisted bugle beads that I purchased from Amazon and straight bugle beads that I purchased from Mood Fabrics. I also got just like glass seed beads. These are all Czech glass beads. I got gold seed beads from, I think, Michael's for the gold detail. For the beading, I got some beading needles. They have a big eye, so it's really easy to thread the thread, which is great. I use those for reinforcing my beading and also the gold detail using the method that I use those. And then a tambour needle. I ended up using the tambour beading method for all of the silver beads in the detail. It's like an embroidery method that also can use beads. In addition to the tambour needle though, I also got an embroidery loom. So this attaches onto this and you can kind of pivot it. And the thing that's great about it is, one, if you're doing a really big embroidery project, this is scrollable, so you can like continuously move it without having to reset a hoop. And two, you can use both of your hands, which is what you need to do for tambour embroidery. And of course, the final piece of all this is the chain shirt that I made in part 1. That we're going to be adding the beading onto. I also want to point out, in addition to all of this, I used this blog that I found. Someone made it a long time ago where they actually visited the museum or wherever they keep the Lord of the Rings movie props in New Zealand. So this blog has been super helpful because they had pictures up close of the actual shirts used in the movies with some explanations of how they were made, which was super useful. The costume department and like prop people actually made a couple different versions of it because it was such a pain in the ass to make, which makes sense because they used really, really tiny chainmail. So definitely makes sense. But one thing that was really useful is that they mentioned that it was in fact some sort of beading with some maybe metal threading, which I didn't end up going with for this, but it was super useful. I hope this website never goes away. But yeah, I think we will get into it. It's officially time for beading. The thought process right now is to do like the strip, like rectangular style strip around the collar in just the silver beads, and then go over top of the silver beads in the design with the gold beads. There is some prep that I did ahead of time that hopefully will be useful. So I went on my iPad and used Procreate to trace like roughly the pattern that is repeated. So if you look at up close shots of mithril, it's like this gold pattern that's kind of repeated around. So I did this. Also have a rough outline of the like perimeter of the neck of the shirt. I also want to explain my plan for how this is going to look once I actually start beading. Like I showed earlier, this is kind of the rough outline of the repeat, and it should fit. So if we look, one full repeat here, and then it'll be like 2 of the designs on the straightaway, and then this last part will be on the curve, and then I'll repeat these 2 on this flat, this on the curve, and then again it'll be this one on the curve, these 2 on the straightaway, this one on the curve, these 2 on the straightaway, and then this one on the straightaway. So it should work out. The next step is to trace this pattern or outline onto my organza. So I'm going to trace it first and then cut it to shape to make sure that I am cutting enough space, and also it needs to fit on my beading loom thing that I got. The design itself is roughly about 1 inch wide, and then there's also a little bit of space, like a border around it. I'm gonna need at least that much space, 1.5 inches on all the edges. Washable, the marker that washes off clothes. I don't think you're gonna see it anyway, but just in case. and I'm going to trace. Voila! You can see that really well. I was a little worried. This is an embroidery loom that I got for this. I am going to be using the Tambour beading method, I think, in addition to maybe just like normal beading. And this seemed to be the best option because you don't need to hold it, and also you can like roll it like a scroll if needed, which I think I will need a little bit. I'm gonna attach my organza. There's little like notches that this goes into, and then it doesn't pull out. Start a scroll in this way. Okay. And now I can use my hands for whatever. And since it's see-through, I can also see what I'm doing. I have a few different types and sizes of silver beads. I thought that kind of varying it a little bit would make it look nicer. I don't know. I am a planner at heart, so I would like to try to have like a pattern that is repeatable throughout this. A pattern that's maybe like every 4 to 5 rows that I can just repeat throughout. Hopefully not run out of beads, because I have no idea how much beading this is going to take. Luckily, the main goal is to have it be on the front. If I need to have it stop at the shoulders and then just have nothing on the back, that's fine. I wanted to try out this method before I took the time to film parts of it. I think it's gonna turn out okay. The one thing I'm very nervous about is if I do a bunch of this beading and then it doesn't fit. Yeah, like I guess I'll worry about that when it comes down to it. I think that this looks okay. I'll do a close-up shot in a minute. But yeah, it's pretty much bugle seed beads going along like the strip, and then I used the same method you would use when beading like a lizard keychain to do the gold part, and I will kind of jump into how I went about doing this right now. This method is pretty repetitive. My main goal was just to mix up the beads so that it didn't look like the same row over and over. So I would use a mix of the small beads, the big beads, the twisted beads, the straight beads, and just make sure that they were roughly the same width going all the way up. For the gold detail part, I am using a method similar to jewelry beading, where you have 2 strings and you weave them like opposite direction. So I made a little template that I'm following, and that I also will like sew the parts in place so I can keep track of where I'm at, starting with this corner. So I'm going to do, if you're not familiar with this method, I have 1 bead on this needle, and I'm going to feed this needle the opposite direction and pull. Since this is the first one, I'm also going to make sure that I pull it to pretty much the center of the string. And this is pretty long, probably longer than people would recommend. For the next part, I'm going to do 2 beads. When working with string this long, it's actually really annoying, but I want it to be all in one piece, so I kind of don't really have a choice. Focus, there it goes. I'm doing sections of this, so each one is going to be slightly different just because I'm not following like an exact pattern. I'm just going to kind of go based off of this little template. And then now that I have a couple done, I'm going to go ahead and attach it here just so you can see how I went about doing that. So I just have like my string taped to the corner, And I'm gonna pop this needle through the first hole on this corner, and then take my beading and I'm gonna feed it through this first bead and then just stick it back through that same hole. So then now it's like attached to this board and I can follow the pattern. There's like holes all along this so I can tack it down whenever I need to. Even though I had the outline pattern of the shape, it was very much a like go by how I feel while making this. There were certain aspects that I knew I was going to do like 1 bead wide or 2 beads wide, but some of the tight corners and stuff were just whatever I could figure out a way to make it look good. So if you look up close, none of them are the same, but they still all have roughly the correct shape. Here's an update. I've decided I don't want to do more beading. So I've angled these corners here, which are going to be like the back shoulder. So this is like along the chest and then your collarbone. This will be along like the top of your shoulder / neck and then the back shoulder. I'm hoping that that'll look okay. I used straight pins to hold the design in the rough shape that I needed it to be in because it would slide all over the place. And then I just used a straight needle and some thread to actually pin it into place. I did not sew every single bead down, just like the main ones to keep it in the right shape that I wanted. I've now put on a layer of fabric glue just on the back of all of the beads in hopes that it'll help keep them in place. Like if the string were to break anywhere along the beading, I don't want like all of the beads to fall off. Not only did I reinforce it in sections and tie knots, I also wanted to just put a bunch of fabric glue on the back to hold everything in place. The next step that I'm thinking, I want to cut out about like a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then fold it over and glue it. For this part, I decided that I was going to do a combination of burning the edges, sewing them down, and also gluing them. So I kind of singed the edges a little bit since this is polyester, and then I folded it over and just did like a basting stitch to hold them in place, and then I went over everything with fabric glue again once everything was in place just to make sure that it stayed there. Finally, I decided I wanted these to be removable because I was so afraid of messing up the beading by like taking it on and off, trying to fold it and put it away. So I sewed on snaps to the back of the beading, and then I connected the other side of the snaps onto the chainmail so I can actually take these off and put them on. I did forget to film me attaching the other side of the snaps, but I just used smaller links in order to connect them just onto the chainmail. This also makes the snaps, like because there's a little bit of a lip, they don't snap as solidly, which I kind of like because I'm afraid to break the beading. And then on the other side, you can't actually tell that there's anything there. So if I want to wear it as just plain chainmail, I can just flip it the other direction. Final result. Since I made these removable, I can snap them on. Just a slight bit of adjusting. We have Mithril. Hopefully you can see this up close. I think from far away this definitely looks great. If you look up close, it's not perfect, but that's what happens when you try to make a non-existent thing in real life. You can kind of see the organza along the edges, which I'm okay with. And then also up here, I'm almost wondering if it's worth adding another snap just because this part of the chain wants to fall, but you can't see it because the beading is in the way, so maybe it's no big deal. But yeah, I think it turned out really well. It was a labor of love, and I wanted to pull my hair out and give up a lot of times, but I'm glad I did it because I think it looks really cool. But looks great. Let's see if I can catch how glittery it actually is in the sun. It looks pretty cool.